Okay. Hi, I'm Susan Leschen, a licensed clinical social worker and the Senior Director of Patient Programs and Volunteer Services for the Marfan Foundation. I'd like to welcome you to the Marfan Syndrome and Related Conditions Empowerment Series. Tonight's webinar is called Love in the Time of Marfan Syndrome and Related Conditions. Marfan syndrome and related conditions may reside in one person's body, but if you are part of a couple, both lives are affected. Marfan syndrome and any related condition becomes the uninvited third member of your relationship. This webinar will focus on loving, creative ways to preserve the romance, the shared love, and the just plain fun of being together. It is being presented by the co-authors of the book, Love in the Time of Chronic Illness, How to Fight the Sickness, Not Each Other. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about each presenter right now. Our first presenter is Roanne Weisman, who is has a Master's of Social Work. Roanne is an award-winning author specializing in science, medicine, and healthcare. Roanne has also written several other consumer health books with physicians, many with a focus on an integrative medicine, combining alternative, complementary modalities with conventional care. Since 1985, she's been providing institutional advancement and communication services to medical, academic, and corporate clients, including the teaching hospitals of Harvard Medical School and other academic medical centers. Roanne and her son Benjamin Weisman have Marfan syndrome, and for many years have been active volunteers with the Marfan Foundation. Barbara Kivitowitz is also a Master's in Social Work. She is a consultant and author specializing in healthcare innovation. She has delivered programs based on this book at major academic teaching hospitals and at patient caregiver conferences. She's on the Patient Family Advisory Councils of Stanford Healthcare and Sutter Health. This webinar will last for 1 hour tonight, and with a 30-minute presentation followed by 30 minutes of questions. At the end of the presentation, please type your questions into the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen, and we will answer as many as we can tonight. And with that, I would like to have Barbara and Roanne begin their presentation.
Susan, could you just show the slide number 2 so they could see who we are?
Yes.
This is us on a good day. And if you could go back to slide number 1, please.
Yes.
So this is Barbara. As Susan was saying, this webinar is for people affected by Marfan syndrome and related disorders and their spouses or partners. We're going to talk about how Marfan syndrome and related disorders affects each person's daily life, as well as the couple relationship. And much of what we'll talk about comes from the research we did for our book, Love in the Time of Chronic Illness, How to Fight the Sickness, Not Each Other. And also, as Susan said, while the syndrome may reside in one person's body, if you're part of a couple, both lives are deeply affected. And even if the condition is stable and well managed, there may still be physical limitations or unexpected pain. And for many people with Marfan syndrome, every day is an adventure and a challenge. How will the joints shake out today? Which activities will be possible or compromised? And for couples living with Marfan syndrome, these kinds of questions are joined by others. How to preserve the romance, how to share the joy of life, and how to have just plain fun being together. And these are some of the questions we'll be exploring today. When we commit to our partner, in sickness as in health, chances are we're paying very little attention to the in sickness part of the vow. Most likely, we are envisioning a future with satisfying careers, a lovely home, happy children. Some of us may wind up with a dull job and cats instead of kids, but usually nowhere in our story is there a placeholder for the intrusion of medical problems. Yet, the Center for Disease Control estimates that almost 1 out of every 2 adults will have a chronic disease in his or her lifetime. In this webinar, I will be acting as the interviewer, asking Roanne to talk about what we learned in writing our book, as well as her personal experiences living with Marfan syndrome. Roanne?
So for those of us dealing with Marfan syndrome and related conditions, we are not alone. By the way, I never refer to these conditions as diseases. One of the practitioners I go to calls it creative physiology, which I kind of like. We are not sick. Instead, we are dealing with physical challenges. And this is especially important when we are talking about being part of a couple with a partner who may have different kinds of challenges. And today, we're going to explore how couples can build relationship resilience when one member of the couple has Marfan syndrome or a related condition. First, it might be good to think about whether you knew about and discussed this diagnosis before you became a couple, or did you find out about the diagnosis after the relationship had begun? Obviously, these are two very different kinds of experiences, and both versions of the narrative happened in my own family.
Roanne, could you tell us a little bit more about your family experience?
My father had Marfan syndrome and hid his condition from my mother, who did not discover the truth until after his premature death at 36 from an aortic aneurysm in the 50s. He died decades before effective medical and surgical treatments became available. But because of those treatments, due in large measure to clinical research funded by the Marfan Foundation, I have survived surgeries and other medical complications, and I'm doing well in my 60s. My son Ben, who also has Marfan syndrome, has improved the family legacy even more. He is not only thriving, but also serving the Marfan community as an active volunteer for the Marfan Foundation. He and his wife, Lindsay, have been together for nearly 10 years, and they discussed this diagnosis from the very beginning of their relationship, unlike my parents' experience. Ben said, rather than try to hide it or run away, I decided to steer directly into it. What was Lindsay's reaction? It didn't faze me, she says. It went along with the other things I was learning about him. He loves the Patriots, hates spicy food, has skinny fingers and nice eyes. When this is Roanne speaking, think about how far my own family has come, I like to think that Ben's grandfather, my father, would have been as proud of him as I am today.
Roanne, thank you for sharing that. Could you extrapolate from your personal experience and tell the listeners what they can learn from your stories?
One obvious lesson here is that secrecy is bad for any relationship, but especially when it involves a serious medical condition. Dealing with the creative physiology of Marfan syndrome and related conditions uses up energy and power, which can often feel overwhelming and takes up a lot of emotional real estate. It takes the combined strength of each person in a committed relationship to manage the challenges of these conditions.
Roanne, you're so right about secrecy being damaging, especially if the secret has to do with a health condition. And that was one thing we heard over and over again from the many couples we interviewed. Roanne, could you talk about why we decided to write this book?
Barbara and I wrote Love in the Time of Chronic Illness because we both had been the patient, in quotes, in our relationships. We had no idea how to manage the impact of chronic conditions on our relationships. And we interviewed couples and experts in fields ranging from psychology to sexuality, to rehabilitation, to finances, to spirituality. And while there is no one answer for all couples dealing with any serious medical challenge, including Marfan syndrome and related conditions, we did learn how many were able to infuse their relationships with resilience and joy, and how it is even possible to use the realities of Marfan syndrome to strengthen and enliven the love of a couple. So back to the perils of secrecy. We learned from writing our book that partnership is power. I would write that down. That's really an important lesson that we learned with any medical condition, including Marfan syndrome and related conditions. And that this partnership has to be transparent. While there, of course, should be privacy in any couple, there should be no potentially damaging secrets. such as the one my father kept from my mother. Perhaps the most important benefit of such transparency is that you don't have to go it alone, as my father obviously did. As many of us know, we usually walk out of the doctor's office having retained less than half of the information we heard. The non-Marfan partner can play an important role as another set of ears, a question asker, a note taker, a post-visit debriefer, and when necessary, a cheerleader.
We spoke to many couples, Roanne, who found it awkward or hard to be completely honest and transparent. They feared that sharing their harder emotions aloud might cause damage. Can you share what we learned about how to help them?
Absolutely. So we did discover, yes, that many couples find it hard to share difficult feelings. We call this speaking the unspeakable. Sometimes when there are physical setbacks due to surgery or new onsets of joint pain, the routines of life may need to change. The non-Marfan partner may need to take over new household and family responsibilities and tasks. And one byproduct of these changes might be troublesome emotions. The non-Marfan partner may feel sadness, worry, and even anger, while the person with the condition may experience guilt, frustration with a body that is just not doing its job, and worry about the result of added stress on the non-Marfan partner. It's natural to want to keep these feelings from your partner for fear that speaking them aloud will cause harm or hurt their feelings. But actually, silence only widens the gap between you. You can learn to use these feelings as bridges rather than have them remain as obstacles. And here is one way to do that, suggested by one of the experts we interviewed for our book.
Susan, could you go to slide 3, please? This is an exercise called emptying your cup that partners can do when one or both have feelings that might be awkward or difficult to share, but definitely need to be shared to keep the relationships strong. So you find a time and a place where you won't be interrupted and where it's quiet. And one person goes at a time. In this activity, the first person, the first partner, shares his thoughts and feelings without blaming the other, while the other partner listens with empathy, trying to put herself in his shoes, without trying to solve the problem. That's critical. This is not about problem solving. This is about empathic listening. Whenever the first speaker pauses, the listener says, "Tell me more," until the speaker has emptied himself. Then they switch roles, and you go through the steps again with the other partner as the speaker. And when you finish, you sit quietly and summon the empathy that you have for each other, even in the midst of harder feelings. There usually is a thread of empathy. Summon that thread of empathy and sit with that for a moment. Expressing feelings that are painful or unspeakable strips them of their power to derail your relationship and exposes them to the clear light of understanding. And sitting quietly together, tapping into that thread of empathy, can be a very helpful activity. According to one of our experts, the noise and hubbub of daily life can often obscure that still small voice inside that expresses the love you feel for each other. It is in silence that we can hear that voice. Another one of our experts, whom we interviewed for our book, said, illness, or in this case, a Marfan diagnosis, illness can be the jolt that removes the dullness from life and unveils the potential. Illness can be the catalyst for having this kind of empathic listening experience with each other. And that not only clears the air, but it strengthens the foundation. Roanne, what else did we learn about how couples cope with a health condition?
There is convincing research in another one of my books called Own Your Health that people who seek to take charge of their medical condition or their illness do better clinically than those who feel that they are just helpless victims. We call this active coping in the book.
Excuse me, Roanne. Susan, could you move on to slide 4?
And we've devoted a whole chapter to how couples can work as a team to create the power of partnership. There are several benefits to this partnership when dealing with Marfan syndrome or related conditions, and they fall into 4 main categories. Can we have the next slide, Susan?
Sorry, Susan. Yes, next slide. Thank you.
So the first category is called support and reaching for the strength. The last thing any person with Marfan syndrome or a related condition wants to be is treated as an invalid. So while it's important for the non-Marfan partner to recognize limitations, as in, let's take the elevator instead of climbing 2 floors to the movie theater, this recognition should be free of value judgments. Think of taking an umbrella when it's raining. It's just something you need to do without judging the rain or the person who needs the umbrella. At the same time, it is important to encourage the person with Marfan syndrome to do what is possible, whether it's taking a walk, swimming, playing golf, or learning to kayak. And it is the responsibility of the person with the condition to make these preferences clear to their partner. The second category is gathering information. Accurate information giving and retention is crucial, and especially in these days of managed care. A partner can serve as an advocate when dealing with the healthcare system and insurance. As I mentioned earlier, I can retain about 40% of what the doctor said when I leave an office for about 90 minutes on a good day. So the role of the unaffected partner can be crucial. A partner joining in a medical appointment can become a memory aid, a note taker, an asker of questions that might not have occurred to the patient, and a consultant in decision-making after the appointment. The next category has to do with hope. Very important category. We know that hope is one of the major levers that there is for improvement in health. And when I'm saying hope, I don't think we have to necessarily hope for a cure or a complete end to our condition, because that's not going to happen. But we can hope for a day with less pain. We can hope that we can get out of bed in the morning without our feet hurting. We can hope that we will have fun with our partner today. Many, many things we can hope for that are actually achievable. I've received emails from people who have read my books, other books and articles, describing the difficulties and in some cases the despair of dealing not only with a problematic body, but also with healthcare providers who may be unfamiliar with Marfan syndrome and other connective tissue disorders, conditions, and be unhelpful or at worst do harm. I have had experiences like this myself, so it is easy to imagine how one might get discouraged and lose hope. In fact, a couple of years ago, I did a couples workshop at one of the Marfan conferences on this very topic. If you are in a relationship, your partner can hold that hope, keeping it alive until you are able to hold it once more. And this is an important role for the partner. One woman said, "My partner was the guardian of hope for me when I was at a low point after Marfan-related heart surgery. He held on to that hope until I could take it over on my own." I actually can't stress enough the importance of that kind of role of the partner, keeping someone from falling into the abyss of hopelessness. The next category is called respecting differences. So what if the non-Marfan partner is an avid skier or a tennis player? One of the realities of a relationship that includes Marfan syndrome or connective tissue conditions is that couple togetherness may not always be possible. And this can be managed without resentment or frustration. Each member of the couple should be free to engage in activities individually that they want to do, and the togetherness comes later with the stories. Respecting and honoring individual preferences and physical abilities is the key to success here.
All four of those ways of doing active coping are so important. And sometimes you need to deliberately practice them till they become ingrained. And they all help to build relationship resilience. Roanne, what else did we learn about resilience? And next slide, please, Susan.
Part of active coping is becoming a resilient person or a resilient couple. So in our book, Love in the Time of Chronic Illness, you will read about Dr. Salvatore Maddi, a psychologist who studied human resilience and what he called hardiness. Why do some people thrive in adversity while others do poorly, suffering from illness, depression, or other ailments? In this book, we applied his theories to couples, and I'm now going to share with you what he called the 3 C's of couple resilience and hardiness. These attitudes can be learned and developed with practice. You can practice this and help each other to think about ways to develop these attitudes. They can be learned, and they increase resilience and hardiness. Their 3 attitudes are commitment, control, and challenge. They all work together along with social support and physical exercise to protect people from stress-induced diseases, as well as diseases or illnesses that cause stress in people, which is much more the case with Marfan syndrome and related conditions. They're not caused by stress, but they can cause stress. Dr. Maddi points out that later studies show that hardiness to be roughly twice as effective in decreasing the subsequent risk of illness when compared with social support and physical exercise. And we go into more detail about this in our book, but here's a summary. So the first hardiness attitude is commitment. You can develop the commitment attitude by simply getting involved with people, things, and contexts that interest you, rather than being detached, isolated, or alienated. And you can do these things together as a couple or on your own and talk about it with your partner. The second attitude is control. You can develop this attitude by resolving to have an influence on the outcomes of your physical condition, rather than lapsing into passivity and powerlessness. The Marfan Foundation uses webinars in dealing with chronic pain as well as dealing actively with issues of the spine, joints, and feet, and many other webinars that are useful to people. So I would say, even with Marfan syndrome and related conditions, we need to take charge of our bodies. The third attitude is challenge in developing hardiness. And you can develop this attitude by challenging yourself to learn continually from all of your experiences, whether they are good or stressful. Stress can be positive, spurring you to find solutions, rather than being a negative source of despair. You don't have to play it safe by avoiding uncertainties and potential threats. Under the guidance of your healthcare professional, you can safely learn to challenge yourself to reach whatever potential you have. I discovered, for example, that knowledgeable Pilates and yoga teachers have helped me gain strength and balance safely, reduce pain, all while protecting my joints. And that's just one example. Why is it important to have hardy attitudes? And why must all 3 be present? As we point out in Love in the Time of Chronic Illness, as acute and chronic illnesses mount, they take a strong toll on both physical and mental health. You might know from your own experiences of being under stress, you feel depleted. And in fact, stress does use many of the resources of the immune and endocrine systems that your body needs to draw upon in order to heal and resolve from the onslaughts of daily life. When you no longer have these repair and recovery mechanisms available to you, you become vulnerable. You can become vulnerable to illness, pain, and especially illnesses in which you have an inherited vulnerability. And of course, Marfan syndrome and related conditions are genetic conditions, so they do fall into that category. But I do have to say that while we have these genes, we don't have to be ruled by them, either individually or as couples. There is always the potential for resilience, hardiness, finding joy, and as a couple building love with each other.
Next slide, please, Susan. We interviewed dozens and dozens and dozens of couples and surviving partners and experts for our book, and it was a real privilege to hear their stories and to learn from them. And a lot of what we've shared with you so far, we were told by our couples and our experts. And these are just some of the words of wisdom. In fact, there were so many, we devoted a whole chapter in the book just to words of wisdom. These are some that really stood out for me. Your life may not be the same, but you can have a good life, even a better life. There's no such thing as false hope. There's only hope. Don't beat yourself up over the things you can't do. People react from their experiences. Don't take it personally. Feel regret without making it guilt. Shift your focus to what really matters in your relationship. And you can have wholeness without recovery. I think that was the point that Roanne was just making before. Next slide, please, Susan. There was one quote that we heard from a gentleman who suffers from a neurological disorder and has been at the doorstep of health crises over and over again. And he explains the persistence of hope in this way. There's always something to be hopeful about, no matter what condition you're in. When you have your health, you can be hopeful about having any of your dreams come true. Once your body fails you, you can rest your hope in your emotions. You can hope that you will still feel love and compassion for others and for yourself. If your emotions become emptied, you still have your spirit, and you can hope to connect to something greater than yourself, something that has a light to shine on your shadows. And when the spirit is gone, then you have already become something else, and who knows what hope awaits you there. So this ends our portion of the talk, and we'll open things up for any questions that you might have, and I'll turn it back over to Susan.
Hi, so thank you very much, Roanne and Barbara. That was really beautiful and wonderful to listen to. And I think it gave me so many new ideas of how to approach things in my relationships with people. If anybody has any questions, please post them in the Q&A space. And right now we don't have anything, so we'll just wait a few minutes. If you do post any questions, I will keep your name. It'll be done privately, so I will not announce who is posting which questions.
Does everyone know how to post questions in the Q&A space? Does that need an explanation, Susan, or do they know?
Well, on your screen, you should see a button on the bottom or someplace that says Q&A, and you just type in that button. If you can't find that and you found the chat instead, I'll also open that up in case people want to put questions in there, if you can find that easier.
I'd even be interested in comments. That
Yeah.
doesn't have to be questions, that if people have their own experiences and reactions, that would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Somebody wrote, what advice do you give for people with Marfan syndrome who are frightened to speak about their syndrome with a potential partner? Excellent.
That is a very good question.
Roanne, why don't you take that one?
Well, having had both experiences in my own family, someone who hid the diagnosis, and my son, who actually shared it. And I think it's part of who we are. And it's very important that potential partners know, much better than deception. But what in particular are you afraid of? I'd be curious to know that.
I'm waiting for an answer. I'm waiting to see if the person answers.
I would just add on to that. I would add on to what Roanne was saying. Pick the moment. Make sure that it's in a quiet place, not a noisy restaurant where your partner's going to be saying, "What? What did you say?" Pick a quiet place, and remember the emptying your cup exercise we spoke of before. You could preface it by saying to your partner, "I have something I want to tell you about, and it's something that is part of who I am, and I really first like you to listen, and then I'll answer any questions you have. And this doesn't have to be the only time we ever talk about this. And I'm sharing it with you now because I care, and I care about it." So you can preface it and then pave the way into sharing.
It's a very good question, though, and it kind of goes to the heart of a relationship and what a relationship is going to be based on.
So would the person who asked the question maybe like to add a little more about if there's something in particular that you are concerned about? Is it what to say, or is it how you're worried that they might react?
I can share one experience that I've had. I'm divorced now, not because of Marfan syndrome, but just for other reasons. And I have been doing some dating, and I had some very interesting conversations with potential partners who noticed that I was not athletic. And one of them said, "I'm really looking for an athletic partner, someone to ski with me, hike with me." And I was very honest. I said, "You know what? That's not me." And we parted in a very friendly way. And I have found other people who take my condition for what it is and for what I am, and who accept it, and who can work with me without criticism or resentment. As I said, when it's raining, you take an umbrella. And if someone has Marfan syndrome, you just work with what you've got.
Okay, we'll leave it open for questions for another minute or two. So the same person said, physical symptoms can be difficult to share about because they may be embarrassing or uncommon. What do you think about that?
I agree. It is difficult, and it can be embarrassing. But I also think it's part of our reality and who we are. And if someone chooses not to accept that, then they may not be the right person, which is hard to accept. But I think that can be the reality.
And I would also say that you need to be comfortable sharing. It has to be right for you to do the sharing. And don't do it prematurely, and don't do it belatedly. When the relationship is at a level where it's time, and I would also suggest that if you've gotten close enough so that you're ready to share hard stuff, chances are your partner may have some level of awareness already. Maybe not a clear explanation, maybe not the right language, but some level of awareness. So it may not come as a complete surprise.
And that person says thank you. So I think we've helped them.
I hope so.
Yeah.
These are hard issues.
Yes, very. Okay, if there's no more questions, then I'd like to thank Barbara and Roanne again for their wonderful presentation. Remember that this presentation will be available on the website in the next few days. So if you'd like to review it or tell others about it, please do. We will be sending you an email with some connections to their book and to other information. In 2019, we have 2 more webinars coming up. One will be on Thursday, March 14th at 8 o'clock, and it's the role of the genetic counselor in your journey. And the second one will be on Wednesday, May 22nd at 8 o'clock, and it'll be on tips for coping with depression, anxiety, and anger. If you want to look for more of these programs, again, please go to our website. And remember that February is Marfan Awareness Month, and we will be sending out tons of information about activities and ways that you can become involved. And our annual conference registration will be launching by the end of February. So if you're interested in that or have any questions, please send me any questions, and please go to the websites for that information. Again, I want to thank everybody for tonight, and I hope that it was helpful to you. I know that I really enjoyed it, and have a good evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.